The sun rose over Casa Grande like a burning coin, casting long, sharp rays across the Arizona desert. Heat shimmered above cracked pavement, warping the horizon, and the air smelled of rusted metal and creosote shrubs. By mid-morning, even the vultures circled higher than usual, as if the silence below carried something too heavy to disturb. On the edge of town, near a patch of forgotten freight containers scrawled with graffiti, a lone figure sat at a warped aluminum bus shelter. The bench beneath him was rusted, its paint long gone, and the structure offered no real shade from the punishing sun. He sat anyway, unmoving, a shadow that refused to fade. His name was Ethan Ward, though no one in Casa Grande knew it. In fact, no one in Casa Grande knew a thing about him. He was just a man in desert fatigues, dusty and faded, but intact boots, planted flat back, pressed against the wall. His posture carried the unmistakable weight of someone used to command and used to silence. Ethan's hair was cropped short, flecked with gray at the temples. Faint scars traced his knuckles like forgotten maps, and the beginnings of a beard shaded the hard line of his jaw. He was 47, though the sun and sand had carved him older. He had served more than 20 years in the United States Marine Corps across Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and other places whose names he couldn't speak aloud. The wars had hollowed out the boy inside him and left a sentinel in his place. But even sentinels have ghosts. And Ethan carried his wherever he went. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not in Casa Grande. Not in broad daylight. His orders were simple: observe, don't engage. A suspected militia network was moving contraband through desert trucking routes, and Ethan had been tasked with monitoring. Quiet work. Unofficial. Unacknowledged. He was supposed to blend into the background like sand into dust. But Casa Grande wasn't the kind of town that welcomed shadows. Especially not now. Just a week earlier, an 11-year-old boy named Miguel Alvarez had gone missing. He'd been last seen riding his bike near the old grain silos on the north side of town. His mother had been working a double shift at the diner. By the time she realized Miguel hadn't come home, the desert night had swallowed him. Search parties turned up nothing. The sheriff's department held tense press conferences but offered no answers. And with each passing day, suspicion spread like wildfire. Everyone was looking over their shoulder, and everyone was looking harder at strangers. So when a man in military fatigues appeared out of nowhere and sat in the heat without moving, people noticed. From the front window of Doyle's Hardware and Feed, a woman stood watching. Margaret Doyle, 52, wiry as barbed wire with silver-streaked auburn hair tied in a low ponytail. She walked with a limp, the legacy of a car crash 2 decades earlier that had stolen her first child and her easy trust in people. Since then, her smiles were rare, reserved mostly for dogs. She narrowed her eyes at the figure across the street. He wasn't asking for food. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even looking around. He was waiting. And Margaret had learned long ago that men who waited without speaking often brought trouble. She picked up the phone, dialing the sheriff's office with steady fingers. "Sheriff's Department," a voice answered. "This is Margaret Doyle," she said. "We've got ourselves a drifter out by the freight lane. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. And after what happened last week, well, you'd better send somebody." She hung up and kept her gaze on the man. Across the street, Ethan shifted slightly, pulling a leather-bound notebook from his pocket. He opened it on his knee, scribbled a few symbols, and shut it again. To anyone else, it looked like nonsense. But to him, it was a map of the desert's heartbeat coordinates patterns, the movements of trucks that didn't belong. The faint creak of the hardware store's door caught his attention. Margaret stepped outside, one hand braced on the frame. Her limp made each step deliberate, her boots crunching against gravel. "You planning to sit there all day, mister?" she called across the street. Ethan lifted his head slowly. His voice, when it came, was deep but calm. "Maybe." Margaret frowned. "People don't sit out in this heat unless they've got something to hide." "You're not from around here?" "No, ma'am," Ethan said evenly. "Just passing through." "Funny thing," she said, crossing her arms. "Most folks who are passing through at least bring water." Ethan said nothing. His silence only sharpened her suspicion. "Let me give you some advice," she went on. "Casa Grande doesn't take kindly to folks who can't say where they're headed. Especially not now. Not after Miguel." For the first time, Ethan's eyes shifted. Miguel Margaret's jaw tightened. The boy who went missing last week. You didn't hear, Ethan shook his head. I just got here. Well, Margaret said, her voice clipped, then let me be clear. People here are on edge. A stranger in military boots sitting quiet as stone. That's not going to make them feel safe. Their eyes locked across the street. Hers burned with suspicion. His steady as stone carried something older, heavier. After a long pause, Ethan said softly, sometimes silence isn't hiding. Sometimes it's remembering. Margaret blinked, unsettled by the words but unwilling to show it. She turned on her heel, muttering, We'll see what the deputies think about that. Back at the bench, Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing the scar on his knuckles with his thumb. He hadn't planned to draw attention. But in a town haunted by the absence of a boy, shadows like him couldn't go unnoticed. And as the minutes ticked by, the low growl of a patrol car began to rise on the desert wind. Ethan closed his notebook, slid it back into his pocket, and set his jaw. This wasn't going to end quietly. Not here. Not in Casa Grande. The patrol car rolled in with a growl of tires kicking up dust as it stopped near the warped bus shelter. The door opened and Deputy Brian Keller stepped out. Stocky, sunburned, always a little too quick to reach for his belt, Brian had lived his whole life in Casa Grande. He knew everyone in town, everyone except the man sitting silent in desert fatigues. Morning, Brian called, resting a hand near his holster. Need some help there, partner? Waiting on a bus that ain't coming. The stranger didn't move at first. Finally, he turned his head slow and deliberate, his gaze calm but unsettling. I'm fine, he said. Just passing through. Yeah. You got ID? The man hesitated. Not because he was guilty, but because the ID he carried wasn't the kind he could show. Not on me. That did it. Brian's eyes narrowed. In a town where a boy had vanished just days earlier, a man with no ID wasn't just suspicious. He was dangerous. Brian tapped his radio. I'll need backup, he muttered low enough that only dispatch could hear. By then, the first few onlookers had started to gather. Margaret Doyle leaned against her storefront arms, crossed her face set in that hard line people used when fear made them stubborn. Across the street, the diner's swinging doors opened, and a handful of regulars stepped out, shielding their eyes from the sun as they stared. That him, someone whispered. The one folks been talking about? He's been sitting there all morning, Margaret said flatly. Didn't move an inch. That's not normal, another replied. Not with what's going on. The name Miguel Alvarez hung in the dry air like a curse. Everyone knew the boy's face, wide smile, scraped knees, the kind of kid who rode his bike until dusk and came home with pockets full of desert rocks. Everyone also knew the silence that had followed his disappearance. No answers, no leads, just questions that turned into suspicion, and suspicion that turned into fear. So when a stranger in military boots showed up without warning, fear needed somewhere to land. And it landed squarely on him. A small voice cut through the murmurs. Is he in trouble? Heads turned. Standing by the chain-link fence, clutching a plastic cup of lemonade, was Noah Ramirez. 11 years old, skinny as a fence post, freckles across his nose. He was the kind of kid who asked questions adults didn't want to answer. Noah, get away from there, his mother, Sophia, shouted from the diner door. Her apron was still tied around her waist, her face flushed from the heat and the fear. But Noah didn't move. He squinted across the lot at the man on the bench. He doesn't look like trouble. The crowd buzzed louder. Kid, you don't know what you're talking about, someone snapped. That man's sitting here like he's waiting for something. Or someone. Noah frowned. He looks like the man in Grandpa's picture, he said. The one with the dog. The one who saved the convoy. That made the crowd stir. A few chuckled nervously. A few more scowled. Don't listen to the boy, a heavy-set man muttered. Kids'll see heroes in shadows. Doesn't mean they're real. But Ethan's eyes flickered. Just for a second, something broke through the stone mask he wore. A convoy. A dog. A memory he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Deputy Keller noticed it too. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, stepping closer. Nothing, Ethan said. His voice was even, but his jaw tightened. Looks like something to me, Keller pressed. Especially with a kid gone missing. You out here watching waiting. You got people spooked, mister." The murmurs thickened into whispers and whispers into theories. He could have been watching Miguel that night, or maybe he saw something and ain't talking no ID sitting in the sun like a ghost. That's not right. Margaret shook her head, lips thin. We don't know what he's done, but we know what he hasn't. He hasn't said one thing to ease a mother's mind. Sofia Ramirez stepped out of the diner, grabbing Noah by the shoulder, pulling him close. "Don't talk to strangers," she hissed. But Noah kept his eyes on the man. "He's not bad," Noah insisted. "I can tell." Sofia's voice cracked low but sharp. "That's what every mother says before the news tells her otherwise." The words cut through the air like a blade. A hush fell over the crowd. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one had dared to say it. What if the missing boy had crossed paths with a stranger just like this? Keller squared his shoulders. "You're going to stand up now," he said firmly to Ethan. "Hands where I can see 'em." Ethan rose slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate. He raised his hands, palms open, and for a moment it looked like the desert itself was holding its breath. "Check his pockets," someone shouted. "Search his bag," another called. But Ethan didn't have a bag. He had only the notebook. When Keller flipped it open, all he saw were coordinate symbols and notations that meant nothing to him. "What the hell is this?" Keller demanded. "Just watching," Ethan replied. "Watching what not everything needs to be said aloud." The answer only made the whispers sharper. "He's hiding something. Those look like codes. Could be maps where he took the boy." Margaret's voice rang out cold and clear. "If he's innocent, why won't he just tell us who he is?" The stranger said nothing. His silence was louder than any confession. Noah pulled against his mother's grip, his voice breaking. "Because he's a soldier. Don't you see? He's one of the good guys. He's not here to hurt us." The crowd turned on him with pity and irritation. "He's a child," someone muttered. "Doesn't know the world yet." But Noah's eyes didn't waver. He stared at Ethan with a kind of faith only children could muster, unfiltered and unwavering. Ethan, for his part, didn't flinch. He just stood there, calm in the storm of suspicion, letting the town project its fears onto him. Across the lot, Margaret felt her stomach twist. Something about the stillness in his posture reminded her of her late husband the last time he came home before deployment. That same quiet wait, as though he'd already left a part of himself behind. She hated how familiar it felt. The tension thickened, with the heat pressing down on Casa Grande like a lid. Rumors spread faster than wind. By sundown, half the town would be convinced the stranger was tied to Miguel's disappearance. And in the middle of it all, Noah's voice lingered like a thread of defiance. "He's not the enemy." But in Casa Grande, where a missing boy's face stared from every lamppost, faith in strangers was a luxury no one could afford. The dusty hum of tires broke through the heavy silence of Casa Grande's main square. A white K9 unit SUV rolled to a stop, its engine coughing heat into the desert air. The side door opened with a hiss, and out stepped Officer Olivia Grant, her boots crunching on gravel. She moved with practiced certainty, her eyes hard, scanning the figure on the rusted bench, Ethan Ward silent, waiting. Behind her came the dogs. Rocky burst out first. He was a striking sight, tall and muscular, a Doberman German Shepherd mix, his sleek black coat glinting under the Arizona sun, reddish-brown markings catching the light. His whole body was coiled like a spring, his muscles rippling with youth and strength. His eyes blazed with intensity as he locked on Ethan. With a guttural bark, Rocky lunged forward, the leash jerking taut in Olivia's hand. His teeth flashed white, his body quivering with energy barely contained. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Parents pulled their children back, whispers cut sharp through the heat. "Dangerous dog. Look at him." But then came the second figure, Shadow. He didn't leap. He didn't strain against the leash. Instead, the older German Shepherd stepped down with steady, deliberate movements. His coat was tinged with gray around the muzzle, his frame broad but weighted with years of service. His eyes didn't burn like Rocky's, they searched, deep-weathered, knowing. "Hold them back," Olivia, someone shouted. Cross, standing near the patrol cars, barked an order, his voice bristling with authority. But Olivia's grip tightened only slightly. She trusted her dogs. And she saw something strange. Shadow wasn't rushing to confront Ethan. He had stopped, frozen ears pricked high as though caught in a memory. Ethan slowly lifted his head. He didn't look at Rocky, still straining at the leash with a storm in his chest. His gaze went straight to Shadow. For a long moment time seemed to fracture. A soldier and a dog. A man marked by war. A shepherd marked by time. Ethan's eyes narrowed. His breath caught. The heat, the crowd, the weight of Cross's men, all of it faded until there was only the dog before him. And then it happened. Shadow let out a low, trembling whine. Not a growl, not a bark of warning, but a sound buried in memory. A sound reserved for one person alone. He stepped forward. One paw, then another, slow but unwavering. His leash went slack in Olivia's hand. Ethan whispered, his voice raw and breaking. "Ranger, is that you?" The shepherd reached him, pressing his head against Ethan's chest. Ethan dropped to his knees, arms curling around the dog's neck. His fingers dug into the coarse fur, his forehead pressing against the shepherd's brow. The square fell utterly silent. The people of Casa Grande, who only minutes earlier had branded Ethan a drifter, a threat, now stood frozen. They didn't understand what they were seeing, but they knew it was not ordinary. This wasn't a man and a stray. This was a reunion. Olivia's mouth fell open, her grip still firm on Rocky's leash. "What the hell?" she murmured. Cross scowled, jaw clenched. He'd seen soldiers reunited with dogs before, but this was something else. Meanwhile, Rocky continued to bark, muscles surging with frustration. His instincts screamed that the stranger was a threat, that he should strike. But then something shifted. His ears flicked back, his tail stilled. He turned his head toward Shadow. The old shepherd wasn't warning. He wasn't posturing. He was home. Rocky's body eased the tension, bleeding away, as if he too recognized a hierarchy deeper than training. He circled once, then dropped his nose to the ground, sniffing hard. His role wasn't to intrude on what was happening, but to keep searching, to prove he had his own part to play. Ethan pulled back just enough to look into the shepherd's eyes. They glistened not with fear, but with a calm only earned by survival. Ethan's voice cracked. "They told me you were gone. They told me you never made it out." Ranger Shadow no longer let out a deep chuff, leaning his weight into Ethan as though to say, "I was lost, but I'm here now." Around them, the townsfolk shifted uneasily. Some whispered about fate, others about ghosts. Little Noah Bradford, who had been watching from the diner steps, gripped the chain-link fence tight. His voice rang out over the hush. "That's the dog from Grandpa's picture. That's the soldier's dog." Cross snapped his head toward the boy, irritation flashing. But the damage was done. The people were beginning to connect the pieces. Olivia tugged Rocky back to her side, her voice low, shaken. He never did that before. Not with anyone." Ethan rose slowly, one hand still resting on Ranger's back. His gaze met Cross's across the square, sharp and unflinching. For the first time, the man who had been silent, hunched and shadowed, looked like what he truly was, a soldier not yet finished with his fight. Cross's lips thinned into a line. He saw the truth unfolding before him, and he hated it. Ranger wasn't just any dog. And Ethan Ward wasn't just any drifter. Together they were something federal orders couldn't easily contain. And somewhere behind them, Rocky's nose caught the faintest trace of something in the dirt, a smell that didn't belong, a thread leading toward the truth of Miguel's disappearance. His tail stiffened, his ears locked forward. He barked once, sharp and decisive, pulling Olivia toward the scent. The square held its breath. The reunion had shaken them, but the desert wasn't finished. Something darker still waited to be uncovered. The square of Casa Grande had never been so still. For a long moment, no one moved. Ethan knelt with Ranger pressed against him, the soldier's broad shoulders shaking with breaths he hadn't allowed himself in years. The German shepherd stood tall despite the weight of time, his gray-touched muzzle buried against Ethan's chest, as if trying to memorize the scent he'd once known. Around them, the crowd watched, caught between awe and suspicion. Murmurs drifted like dry leaves in the desert wind. Did you see that he knew him? That dog knew him. Or maybe the soldier trained him before. You think he's connected to Miguel? The name dropped like a stone into water, Miguel. The town had lived with that name in hushed tones for weeks. Miguel Alvarez, the boy who had vanished after walking home from the playground one hot evening. His face had been plastered on flyers, curling at the corners taped to lampposts stuck to diner windows. Every stranger who passed through Casa Grande carried the weight of that name in the side glances people gave. And now, seeing Ethan with a dog that wasn't supposed to exist, the whispers collided into nervous speculation. Olivia Grant tightened her grip on Rocky's leash, her other hand brushing against the weapon holstered at her hip. Her eyes darted between the soldier and her dogs. Rocky was no longer lunging at Ethan. Instead, the young canine had lowered his ears, pacing in a slow circle, nose pressed to the ground. His body quivered not with aggression, but with focus. Shadow Ranger remained locked to Ethan, their reunion burning like a brand on the crowd's memory. Cross stepped forward, his boots striking hard against the pavement. His presence alone sliced through the murmurs. "Everyone stand back," he barked. His tone carried the weight of command, though the townsfolk didn't scatter as quickly as he expected. They lingered transfixed by the sight of the soldier and the shepherd. Ethan finally rose to his feet, one hand on Ranger's back. His voice was rough but steady. "This dog, his name is Ranger. He's not yours anymore. He's mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Ranger, that's the name in the article. The one about the unit lost overseas." Cross's jaw tightened. He didn't want this conversation happening here, not in front of these people. Not when control was slipping. Olivia Cross snapped, turning to the officer. "Secure your animals." But Olivia didn't move. Her eyes were locked on Ranger Shadow as she had known him until minutes ago. She had trained that dog, given him commands, trusted him on patrol. And yet here he was, melting into the arms of a stranger, a soldier whose presence unsettled her from the first moment. Her voice was low, almost incredulous. "You've been with me for 2 years. How do you just remember him?" Ranger didn't need words. His answer was in the way he leaned into Ethan. His body relaxed, his gaze steady. Bonds forged in war did not unravel with time. Rocky's sudden bark cut through the tension. His whole frame stiffened as his nose dug into a patch of dirt near the fence line. Olivia tugged the leash, but the young dog pulled harder, pawing at the ground with urgency. His bark wasn't the sharp alarm of aggression, it was the urgent call of a K9 on scent. Heads turned. A man muttered, "That's near where Miguel's cap was found." The air shifted. The town's unease doubled back on Ethan. A woman's voice trembled from the crowd. "What if he knows something about Miguel?" Ethan turned, his face taut with anger. "I had nothing to do with your boy," but the seed of doubt had been planted. Cross seized the moment, his tone cold and measured. "Then you won't mind answering questions under federal authority." The crowd stirred again. Some nodded grimly, others recoiled, unsure who to trust. Ranger stepped forward, his body half shielding Ethan as if he could sense the hostility thickening in the air. His growl was low warning. Noah Bradford, the freckled boy who had spoken earlier, pressed against the fence, his voice rising above the adults. "He's not the enemy. That dog remembers him. Don't you get it? He's a soldier." The boy's words hung in the air, fragile but powerful. Ethan's eyes softened as they landed on the child. A memory flickered in his mind. Faces younger than they should have been, faces that war had taken too soon. He gave the boy a small nod, gratitude written in the silence between them. Olivia crouched beside Rocky, pulling him gently back, but her brow furrowed. The dog's body trembled with intensity, his tail stiff, his nose locked on the soil. She whispered under her breath, "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" The square felt like a tinderbox, each glance and whisper a spark waiting to ignite. On one side stood Ethan and Ranger, bound by something unbreakable. On the other, Cross, with his badge and his authority demanding control. And circling at the edges was Rocky, his nose pressed to the earth as if the ground itself held the truth no one wanted to face. The wind died, and for a heartbeat the whole town seemed to hold its breath. The air in Casa Grande Square grew heavy, thick with the kind of silence that came before a storm. Ethan stood with one hand resting on Ranger's back, his face hardened while the crowd pressed closer, their curiosity sharpening into unease. Samuel Cross broke that silence. His voice was low but carried like a crack of thunder. "This dog," he said, pointing, "is not yours. He is federal property listed MIA 5 years ago. His designation is RGR-21. Ranger. By law, he belongs to us. The words struck like a blow. Olivia's head snapped toward Cross, her brows furrowing. She shook her head. Federal property? That's impossible. Shadow's been with me for 2 years. I trained him, ran patrols with him. You're telling me all that time he was what? A ghost from your war cross didn't flinch. Not a ghost. A soldier. And one that never should have ended up in your department. Murmurs rippled through the townsfolk. Some glanced at Ethan, others at Ranger, their confusion spilling into suspicion. An older man barked, "If he belongs to the government, why the hell was he here in Casa Grande?" Cross didn't answer. He didn't need to. The power in his badge spoke for him. Ethan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. He doesn't belong to you. He's not equipment. He's not some asset you sign in and out like a rifle. He's my partner. He dragged me out of a collapsed compound when everyone else thought we were both gone. You declared him dead because it was easier than admitting you lost track of him. Cross's jaw tightened, but his eyes never wavered. You're letting sentiment blind you, Ward. Discipline and order keep this country safe, not feelings. Ethan's voice dropped raw and sharp. Don't you dare talk to me about discipline. I've lived it. I've bled it. And I know the difference between discipline and cowardice. You buried his name in paperwork, but he lived. And now he's here with me. That's not sentiment. That's truth. The crowd shifted, whispers swelling louder. He saved him. Then he should stay. But the law... Margaret Doyle, the shop owner who had first called in the sighting of Ethan, stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. I was wrong about him. I thought he was a drifter, maybe dangerous. But if that dog chose him, if it remembers him, then he's not a stranger. He belongs with his soldier. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Cross raised a hand, silencing them. This is not a town hall vote. This is federal jurisdiction. The dog comes with us. Ranger let out a low growl, stepping closer to Ethan, his body half shielding him. Ethan's hand pressed against the shepherd's shoulder, steadying him. His eyes locked on Cross. You'll have to go through me first. The tension snapped taut like barbed wire. Deputy Mercer's hand twitched near his holster. Olivia stepped in, her voice sharp. Stop. Nobody's drawing weapons over this. She looked at Ranger again, shaking her head in disbelief. 2 years. And now I find out you weren't mine at all. Her voice softened. But you still worked for me. You still saved lives here. So don't you dare say he's just property. Cross ignored her, his focus fixed squarely on Ethan. Ward, you're out of line. You're interfering with federal command. If you don't stand down, you'll face consequences. Ethan took a step closer, their faces inches apart, his voice steady but seething. The only consequence I care about is this. If you try to take him, you'll have to take me too. Because we don't walk away from each other. Not now. Not ever. For a moment the square went utterly still. The crowd held its breath, watching 2 men locked in a battle of wills. One a soldier clinging to the only piece of his soul he had left, the other a federal agent determined to enforce a system that saw loyalty as paperwork. Then from the edge of the square a sharp bark split the silence. Rocky. The young canine pulled hard against Olivia's gripped nose, pressed to the dirt near the fence line. His body quivered, ears locked forward, tail rigid. He barked again, urgent this time, then pawed furiously at the ground. Olivia's eyes widened. He's on something. The townsfolk turned, whispers colliding with alarm. Is it Miguel? Did he find something? Ethan's gaze flicked to Rocky, then back to Cross. The argument hadn't ended, but something far more pressing had just begun. The desert held its breath once more, waiting for what Rocky had uncovered. Rocky's bark echoed across the square, sharp and insistent. It wasn't the warning bark of aggression, it was the sound of discovery. His body was rigid, tail-stiff nose buried in the dirt at the far edge of the fence line. He pawed frantically, sending up small sprays of dust. Olivia jerked forward, straining to keep her grip on his leash. Easy, boy. What is it? But Rocky wouldn't be stilled. His entire frame quivered with focus. his head jerking back and forth as he inhaled deeply, tracking something invisible to human senses. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He knew that posture. He'd seen it before years ago in Kandahar in the middle of a collapsed alleyway when Ranger had gone rigid just like this. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Let him work," Ethan called. Olivia glanced at him conflicted, then loosened her hold just enough. Rocky surged forward, nose locked to the ground, pulling her several feet along the fence line until he stopped dead. His paw struck something hard beneath the sand. The crowd edged closer. A boy shouted, "What's he found?" Olivia crouched, brushing dirt away with her hands. Her breath caught. There, half buried in the soil, was a torn piece of fabric. She lifted it carefully. The crowd gasped. It was a child's t-shirt. Small, faded blue, streaked with dirt. Someone cried out, "That's Miguel's!" A ripple of panic tore through the square. Voices overlapped, fear bubbling back to the surface. "Does that mean he's... Where is he? Is he alive?" Olivia swallowed hard, holding the shirt high for all to see. "It's evidence," she said, her voice tight but steady. "It means he was here." Ethan stepped forward, Ranger at his side. The old shepherd lowered his nose to the dirt near where Rocky had scratched. He inhaled deeply, then let out a low rumble in his throat. His ears twitched, his tail stiffened. Ethan knelt, his hand brushing Ranger's neck. "You smell it too, don't you? Blood, sweat, fear." He looked up at Olivia. They were moving fast. "Someone dragged him through here." The crowd broke into frightened murmurs. "Dragged? Oh God, who would do such a thing?" Cross's voice cut through the noise, cold and authoritative. "Step back, all of you. This is now an active federal investigation." But the townsfolk didn't move. Their eyes stayed locked on Ethan and the dogs. For the first time, fear gave way to something else, hope. "Maybe they can find him," Margaret Doyle whispered. "Maybe that soldier and his dogs can do what the rest of us couldn't." Rocky barked again, his body straining to move further down the fence line. Olivia fought to restrain him, but Ethan raised a hand. "Let him go," he said. "He's got the trail." Olivia hesitated, then slowly unclipped the leash. Rocky shot forward like a bullet, nose glued to the dirt, weaving back and forth as his body carved a line through the dust. Ranger followed, slower but deliberate, checking every scent Rocky marked as though confirming the younger dog's work. Ethan jogged alongside them, his voice firm, steady. "Easy, Rocky. Steady, Ranger. One step at a time." The trio moved together, youth and speed leading age and wisdom shadowing man, and memory binding them all. The crowd spilled after them, their earlier fear transformed into urgency. Rocky halted suddenly at the edge of an abandoned lot. His head shot up, ears locked forward, eyes bright. He pawed at the dirt again, then whined, circling a spot where the ground looked recently disturbed. Ethan crouched low, brushing his hand across the soil. It was loose, freshly turned, the desert crust broken. He dug deeper, pulling free a child's shoe, its laces frayed. A woman in the crowd gasped. "That's Miguel's. I bought him those shoes." The square erupted. Cries of fear and hope tangled together, people pressing forward to see. Cross barked orders, trying to force them back. "Get this area clear. Step back now." But the people ignored him. Their faith had shifted. They no longer looked to him. They looked to the soldier and his dogs. Ethan held up the shoe, his jaw tight. He was here. Recently. He looked down at Ranger, who stood, rigid ears, pinned eyes, scanning the horizon like a sentinel. Then to Rocky, still circling, eager, desperate to press on. Olivia's hand trembled as she clipped the leash back onto Rocky's collar. She looked at Ethan, her voice hushed but resolute. "I've worked with that dog for years. He's never locked onto a trail like this. Not once." Ethan nodded. "Then trust him now. He's telling us Miguel's still out there." The crowd fell silent, hanging on those words. The fear that had suffocated Casa Grande began to crack, replaced by something fragile but burning belief. Cross's eyes narrowed as he watched Rocky straining against the leash, energy radiating off his young frame. He turned his gaze back to Ranger, whose sides rose and fell heavily with each breath. The old shepherd was still sharp, still loyal, but the years weighed on him. Cross's mind churned. One dog fading, another rising. The soldier clung to the past, but the future stood right in front of him, muscles taut, instincts blazing. Interesting, Cross muttered under his breath. But Ethan wasn't watching Cross. His eyes were fixed on the trail ahead, on the way Ranger and Rocky stood side by side, one leading, one confirming. Together they were more than dogs. They were the last thread of hope for a town on the edge of despair. Ethan rose, dust clinging to his fatigues. He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying over the stillness. "We're not finished. This isn't over. Miguel's still out there, and we're going to bring him home." The people of Casa Grande erupted in applause, not polite claps, but the raw, desperate kind that carried prayers in their palms. For the first time in weeks, the town felt less like a place haunted by loss and more like a place chasing hope. Ranger let out a low chuff, pressing against Ethan's leg. Rocky barked once, sharp and commanding, as if to say, "Follow me." And so they did. The sun slipped behind the western cliffs, painting Casa Grande in bruised shades of violet and gold. The town square, so loud only moments ago, grew hushed as Ethan, Olivia, and a handful of deputies prepared to follow the trail out into the desert. Rocky paced at the end of his leash, body taut, muscles trembling with the need to move. His ears flicked constantly, nostrils flaring as if the air itself whispered secrets only he could hear. Olivia steadied him, though it was clear the young K9 was pulling her more than she was guiding him. Beside Ethan, Ranger stood calm but heavy breathing, his chest rising and falling with the deliberate rhythm of a dog who had learned patience through years of war. His steps weren't quick, but each one was certain, precise. Ethan crouched to brush his hand across the shepherd's neck, murmuring low, "Still with me, old friend?" Ranger gave a short chuff in response, leaning his weight against Ethan's leg before turning his gaze toward the desert road. Cross stood near the patrol cars, arms crossed, face expressionless. But his eyes tracked Rocky as the dog strained against Olivia's grip, his body an arrow pointed into the dark. When Ethan passed, Cross fell in step, his voice low. "You're chasing a ghost, Ward. Evidence doesn't mean survival." Ethan didn't look at him. Ghosts don't leave fresh tracks. They moved out. The desert night swallowed them quickly. The last remnants of sunlight bled away, replaced by a rising moon that cast long silver shadows over the scrub and sand. The air cooled, but it carried with it the brittle silence of a land that kept its secrets well. Rocky surged ahead, nose to the ground, weaving side to side across the dusty trail. His body radiated urgency, tail-stiff ears locked forward. Olivia jogged to keep pace, muttering under her breath, "Easy, boy. Don't burn yourself out." Behind him, Ranger moved slower, deliberate, checking each point Rocky flagged. Where Rocky darted, Ranger paused, inhaled, confirmed. Ethan noticed it, the way Ranger's body took longer to settle, the way his breaths came harder after each sprint. But his focus never wavered. His old partner might not be as fast, but he was still sharp, still methodical, still dependable. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. He's aging, but he's still here, still mine. The trail led them past rusted freight containers and into the scrubland that stretched beyond the last glow of town. Cactus shadows loomed like skeletal sentries. The moonlight silvered Rocky's coat, catching the reddish markings on his legs as he bounded forward. He barked once, pulling hard toward a patch of ground near a collapsed fence. Olivia dropped to her knees beside him, sweeping her flashlight beam. She froze. "Blood," she whispered. A dark smear stained the dirt, faint but fresh. The deputies exchanged grim looks. One muttered, "He was hurt." Ethan crouched beside Ranger, who had lowered his nose to the same patch. The old shepherd inhaled, then let out a deep growl, his ears pinning back. Ethan rubbed his fur, steadying him. Yeah, he was here. And he didn't go willingly. The group pressed on, guided by Rocky's relentless drive. He tracked across open sand, over dry washes, down into gullies where the air hung heavy and still. Ranger followed slower now, but every pause he made reassured Ethan that the young dog's instincts weren't running wild, they were true. At one point, Rocky stopped, dead ears swiveling. His body stiffened, his tail lowered, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Olivia tensed. "What is it?" A shape moved in the distance, coyotes scattering under the moonlight. Rocky barked once sharp, then relaxed, pressing his nose back to the trail. Olivia exhaled, muttering, "You're going to give me a heart attack, kid." Ethan's hand stayed on Ranger's shoulder. He knew the signs. Rocky was eager, but Ranger's steadiness was the anchor. Together they were balancing each other. Hours seemed to stretch as they moved deeper into the desert. The town lights disappeared behind them, swallowed by the horizon. Only the crunch of boots on gravel, the steady panting of dogs, and the distant cry of night birds broke the silence. Finally, Rocky pulled hard toward a dry arroyo where the moonlight pooled like water. He circled tight, barking louder now, pawing at a collapsed bundle near the rocks. Olivia hurried forward, her flashlight beam slicing through the dark. She gasped. It was a backpack torn dirty, the fabric frayed at the seams. She lifted it slowly, and the crowd that had followed from a distance edged closer, their breaths held. On the pack was a patch sewn with a single name, Miguel. A woman cried out in the back of the crowd, That's my son's." The sound of her voice cracked something open in the night. Ethan knelt, taking the backpack in his hands, brushing away the dust. He placed it down in front of Ranger. The old shepherd lowered his nose, inhaled, then barked once short, certain. Ethan's eyes lifted, burning with determination. "He's alive. He was here, and we're close." The crowd broke into cries of both fear and hope. Some clutched each other, others whispered prayers. Cross's voice sliced through. "This doesn't prove he's alive. It proves he was taken, and that means danger." His eyes slid to Rocky, whose chest still heaved with energy, whose eyes glinted like molten metal in the moonlight. Cross's jaw tightened. This one has potential. Fresh, strong, untapped. But Ethan didn't hear him. He stood with Ranger at his side, the old shepherd pressing close, steady, even as age tugged at his frame. Ethan's voice rang over the desert wind. "We're not stopping. Not until we bring him back." Rocky barked, lunging forward, his body a streak of shadow and fire in the night. Ranger barked too, slower, deeper, but no less resolute. For a heartbeat, their voices merged, echoing across the empty desert like a promise carved into stone. The hunt had begun. The search bled into the early hours of dawn. The desert was hushed, the air sharp with cold, when Rocky froze at the mouth of an abandoned irrigation culvert. His body quivered, ears stiff, tail low but steady. He let out a single bark, sharp and resolute. Olivia dropped beside him, her flashlight beam stabbing into the dark hollow. For a moment there was only dust and silence. Then the faintest sound drifted back, a cough. A child's cough. "God!" Olivia breathed, her voice breaking. "He's here." Ethan pushed forward, Ranger at his side. The shepherd lowered his body, crawling into the culvert without hesitation, his old frame moving with the precision of memory. Ethan followed on his knees, his flashlight shaking with urgency. And there he was. Miguel Alvarez curled against the concrete, his face streaked with dirt and tears, his small hands gripping the straps of his torn backpack as if it were a lifeline. His lips trembled. "Mister, don't let them take me again." Ethan's chest constricted. He reached out, his voice low but steady. "You're safe now, son. You hear me? You're safe." Ranger nosed forward, pressing gently against the boy's arm. Miguel's eyes widened, then softened, recognition dawning, as if he had seen this dog in some old story. His small fingers buried themselves in Ranger's fur, clinging tight. Ethan wrapped an arm around Miguel, pulling him close. With Ranger leading the crawl, they backed out of the culvert and into the rising light. When the boy's figure emerged, the crowd waiting on the ridge erupted. Mothers cried out, fathers shouted prayers, and strangers fell to their knees in thanks. Miguel's mother, Rosa, broke through the deputies with a scream of his name, collapsing around her son in sobs of joy and disbelief. Casa Grande, a town that had lived with fear etched into every corner, exhaled as one. But the eyes of the town soon shifted, not just to Miguel, but to the man who carried him and the dog who had let him out. Ethan and Ranger stood at the center of the circle, battered by dust and time, but unshaken. Whispers grew into words, words into chants. Heroes, the soldier and his dog. God sent them here. Ethan lowered Miguel gently into his mother's arms. The boy clung to Ranger one last time, whispering something against the shepherd's ear, before Rosa pulled him close. Ranger stood still, accepting the gratitude in silence as he always had. Ethan straightened his hand, resting on Ranger's back. For a rare moment he allowed himself a breath that wasn't burdened with ghosts. This wasn't war. This was home. but Samuel Cross shattered it. He stepped forward, his tone slicing through the cheers. Enough! His eyes burned cold as steel. That dog ranger is still federal property. He will be returned for evaluation and reassignment. The crowd's joy turned instantly hissing with anger. Shouts rose. No, he saved Miguel. He belongs with the soldier. Rosa Alvarez clutched her son tighter, her voice breaking as she cried out, Don't you dare take him away! Cross raised his badge, his voice hard. This is not a debate. Federal jurisdiction overrides local sentiment. That dog comes with me. Ethan stepped forward, his body between Cross and Ranger, his voice steady but resonant. No, he doesn't. Not this time. The crowd surged with applause, stamping their feet, clapping, shouting their support. They weren't simply defending a soldier and his dog, they were defending what they had just witnessed with their own eyes. Olivia glanced from Rocky to Ranger, then back to Ethan. For 2 years, Shadow had been her partner. Yet now she saw clearly this wasn't betrayal. This was destiny. She tightened her grip on Rocky's leash, her voice firm. Sir, with all respect, you're wrong. This dog doesn't answer to you. Not anymore. Cross's jaw flexed, fury rising as he realized control was slipping from his hands. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ethan cut him off, his voice sharp and final. You buried him in paperwork. You wrote him off as dead. But he lived. He fought. And he chose me. Ethan's hand pressed against Ranger's neck. You can call him property. I'll call him what he is, my brother. And I'll fight for him until my last breath. The square went silent, every word echoing against the sandstone walls. Then the applause began again, louder, fiercer, until the desert itself seemed to tremble with it. Cross's face was stone, but his eyes betrayed calculation. He looked once more at Ranger, chest heaving with the weight of age, then at Rocky, young and unbroken, standing taut at Olivia's side. His lips curled into the faintest hint of a smirk. If not this one, he murmured almost to himself, then maybe the other. But Ethan didn't hear. He was too busy kneeling beside Ranger, his forehead pressed against the old shepherd's brow. We're not done yet, partner, he whispered. And in the growing dawn, as Casa Grande rallied behind them, Ethan knew the fight for Ranger's fate was only just beginning. Dawn broke over Casa Grande, spilling pale light across the square where the town still lingered. The night had been long search parties, fear, hope, but now Miguel was safe in his mother's arms, and the people had witnessed something they could not forget. Yet the celebration was short-lived. Samuel Cross stood at the center of it all, his jaw locked tight, his badge catching the first light of the sun. He had listened long enough to the cheers, the applause, the chants of heroes. For him, none of it changed the reality. He raised his voice steady and unyielding. Listen closely. The Shepherd designation RGR-21 call sign Ranger is federal property. He was presumed lost, but now he has resurfaced. He will be taken into custody for evaluation and reassignment. The words hit the crowd like a slap. The square erupted in protest. No, you can't take him. He belongs with the soldier. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers shouted curses at the man in the suit. Even Miguel, his face still pale, clung to his mother's side and whispered, Don't let them take the dog. Cross didn't flinch. He stood firm, his eyes sharp behind the polished lenses of his glasses. This is not up for debate. The United States government does not negotiate its property. Ethan stepped forward, Ranger at his side. The old shepherd pressed close, his breathing heavier now, but his posture steady, ears perked, eyes locked on Cross as if he understood every word. Ethan's voice was low, but it carried across the square like steel scraping stone. You buried him in paperwork. You marked him dead because it was easier. But he lived. He fought. And he chose me. Cross cut him off. That is irrelevant. He comes back with us. Ethan closed the distance, his face inches from Cross's. His words came slowly, deliberate, unshakable. Where he goes, I go. You want to put him back in chains, then chain me too. Because we don't walk away from each other. Not now. Not ever. The crowd roared in approval. Applause thundered, voices chanting Ethan's name, Ranger's name, cries of defiance against the federal man who dared call their hero property. Cross's eyes flicked across the square, calculating. He could see the truth. This wasn't a town he could bulldoze. Not now, not in daylight, not with so many eyes and so many voices, but he had time. The system always had time. Olivia stepped forward, Rocky bristling at her side. The young dog barked once, sharp and protective. Olivia's voice cracked, but it held resolve. You can't take him away from Ethan. Not after what we all saw. That bond is real, and it's stronger than any protocol you'll ever write. Cross gave her the briefest glance, dismissive, then turned his attention back to Ethan. His lips pressed thin. Very well. Transport has already been called. When the helicopter arrives, both of you will come with me. Debriefing, processing, and whatever happens after, that's out of your hands. The crowd booed, shouting in protest, but Ethan didn't move. His hand rested on Ranger's back, steady and sure. His jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving Cross's. So be it, he said. Ranger let out a low chuff, leaning against his soldier's leg. Ethan bent down, pressing his forehead against the shepherd's muzzle, whispering words only the dog could hear. The people of Casa Grande fell silent, moved not by Cross's authority, but by the sight of a man and his dog unbreakable, even in the face of power. Cross adjusted his watch, turning away. His face betrayed nothing, but as his gaze drifted briefly to Rocky, muscular young, brimming with untapped energy, a thought flickered in his mind. The beat of rotor blades began to echo faintly over the horizon, growing louder with each passing second. The crowd shifted uneasily, dust swirling in the air. Casa Grande braced itself, knowing the soldier and his dog would soon be taken from their sight, but not their hearts. The helicopter was gone, its roar fading into the horizon. Dust settled over Casa Grande, and the crowd slowly dispersed, though their hearts still clung to the image of the soldier and the shepherd leaving together. On the edge of the square, Olivia tugged lightly on Rocky's leash. "Come on, boy," she murmured. Rocky moved, but not with his usual eagerness. His paws slowed, his head tilted back toward the sky. A low bark slipped from him, soft and uncertain, as if trying to call after what had just vanished. He had watched Ethan and Ranger stand as one, refusing to be separated. That bond, unshakable and absolute, stirred something buried deep inside him. For a moment, Rocky wasn't in Casa Grande anymore. He was back in the shadows of the forest, small and trembling, the sting of being cast aside still fresh. That memory had never left him. Training had dulled it, duty had buried it, but now it rose again, sharp and clear. He turned to Olivia. She stood steady, her hand firm on the leash, her eyes still carrying the awe of what she had seen. Rocky stepped close, pressing his head against her leg. She startled, then smiled softly, resting a hand on his back. "Good boy." Rocky's eyes softened. But somewhere in the depths of his heart, a vow remained. One day he would return to the forest. One day he would seek the truth of where he came from.